Hey friends, thanks for jumping in on the Northwest Youth Podcast, where we're believing that the voices and experiences right here from the Pacific Northwest will equip our youth ministers and youth ministries to reach students and bring the hope of Jesus to our communities. Hey Northwest Youth, I'm joined today by Pastor Jesse Dinius out of the Grove Church up in beautiful, amazing Marysville, Washington. And today we're going to have a conversation about what it looks like to partner with other ministries and doing events and activities, but also really more to the point, why it's important as pastors that we have people that we partner with. But before we get there, tell us about yourself, tell us about your family, what's going on in your life.
Yeah. So again, Jesse, up in Marysville. If you're heading up to Marysville, you get to cross over the wastewater treatment plant right before you get to us. So that's an incredible way to enter our town. But I've been there for about 3 years in August. And married, have a baby on the way, due in about 3 weeks, which is really exciting. And
so by the time this podcast airs, you'll be a dad.
Yes.
Okay.
So by the time you're listening to this, please be praying because I'll be tired and not sleeping. And so, but yeah, we're excited to have a little baby girl, and so excited for that.
Do we have a name?
We do, and I can't tell you that. So
you know I was going to try.
It's probably
you
public.
Knew I was going to try.
Yep. I knew you would try. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so leading youth and young adults ministry, started about 6 months before COVID in a new place, and loved the Grove, and it was definitely a wild couple years, but things are a little more normal now than they have been, and so we're excited about that, and loving Jesus, loving students, and it's a good time.
Yeah, tell me one thing you're excited about youth ministry right now that's happening at the Grove.
Yeah, well, we do a tutoring outreach that happens every week, and right now we have about 20 to 25 students that definitely show up, and there's some who don't necessarily need help with school, who are just there to hang out and study, but they have a safe place to be. And we have great partnerships with our local school district. And so it's been cool just seeing God throw open doors and students show up and be a part of something. And we're just excited about that going into the summer and all that God's doing.
What a great way to serve your community, just creating that space. I mean, not a bad thing if they just want to come hang out and do homework.
Yeah.
Right. There's worse things.
Well, there's free food, and that's what I think draws them a little bit. So.
A little? That's it, right?
Yep.
That's it. When everybody talks about youth ministry, you just instantly see pizza, hot dogs, endless amounts of soda, and Red Bull.
Yep.
That's youth ministry right there.
That's accurate. They don't teach you that in Northwest. It's just, something you just know when you're called, I guess.
No. One of our guests was talking about just the smell of hot dogs and hamburgers just brings people in. I'm like, yes, it does.
Yep.
That's good. Well, today, let's get to our topic. Let's talk about partnering with others in ministry events. Tell us why. Why is it important to partner with other ministries and other youth pastors when you're doing youth events?
Yeah. Well, I love that we have this topic. And coincidentally, earlier this week, I was meeting with a guy from our community and talking about different, he was curious about tutoring and sort of what we were doing. And he posed this question. He was like, why don't churches like to partner with each other? And he's not a pastor, doesn't have a staff position or anything like that, but just as someone in the community saying, why don't churches like working together? I don't get it. He went as far as to say, like, church partnership just doesn't exist, which I think you and I know is not accurate.
Yeah.
But sometimes, depending on the organization or the church, it could be less so than in other places. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think sometimes we don't partner because we're prideful, and we sort of get fixated on this idea of what I can accomplish will be better for my students, for my ministry. And we can almost get into this mindset where we're really building our own kingdom and not so much God's kingdom, which I think is something that, it's easy to slip into, especially when you have this comparison mindset with social media, all those things going on. And within that, too, also competition. And I remember my first ministry position, we actually hosted another youth ministry that met on Tuesday nights, and then we met on Wednesday nights. And my youth ministry had about 15 students in average attendance, and theirs was about 175 to 200 a week. And so I had to host and be there on Tuesday and then be excited for my youth ministry the next night. And that's a challenge. And I remember a parent who went to the other youth ministry came up to me. He's like, why don't you guys just, combine forces, become one thing? Like, they already have this really awesome thing happening. And this is a parent from my church.
Right.
And I remember thinking, like, well, because I have bills, I need to pay my rent. I need a job. I would love to be his, admin or something, I guess. But, and within me, that's something I had to repent of because it created this competitive spirit within me. of feeling almost threatened, like, if we partner with this other thing, and it depends on your community, sort of how that shakes down. And really, I think over the past couple of years, there's just a sense of division in the church as a whole, and almost this desire to say, I don't really want to be affiliated with, maybe that specific church based on, it's the classic masking, no masking, vaccine, no vaccine. And I think that has made churches working together and partnering for events challenging, which can trickle down into youth ministries and all of that.
Yeah. I think pride, for me personally, often it was just insecurity, right? Like, I didn't want other people to know that what I was doing, because I thought they might judge it as not cool enough or not good enough. And so it was just easier to not talk about what we were doing or invite someone to partner with me. So obviously within our fellowship, the Northwest Ministry Network, we've got, kind of a built-in community that we could rely on. But you're talking about across denominational lines, even different theologies, right? But in the midst of that, there's some things that we do have common ground on, right? That Jesus is who Jesus is,
totally,
right? And that the only way to be saved is through Him, and so whether or not you're Pentecostal or you're Baptist or you're Nazarene, there's so much more that we agree on than what we wouldn't agree on, and theologically in our communities. But other than, like, obviously just the insecurity side, or someone like the language that you'll hear people use, they're stealing my kids.
Yep.
Right.
We've heard that one.
We've heard that, right?
Yep.
And we laugh about it, kind of, but we also laugh uncomfortably because we've all felt it, and it stings, right? You invest in students and you feel that. Do we all know theologically that there's God's kids, kingdom, big picture stuff is good? Yes.
Yeah.
But it does still sting. There's no question.
Yeah. And a great example of that, I mean, in our community right now, there's another youth pastor who I've gotten to know. His name is Alex. And you're saying, different denomination and different church context, everything is different. But the great thing about our relationship is that we both want the same thing for our students. And when it comes to campus ministry opportunities, right now we're dreaming about how can we get some other churches in our community together, even just for simple youth stuff, to like rally and do things.
Let's go.
Him and I have both said, if we're on campus and we're talking to students and we meet someone, hey, like I want to go to Alex's church, or I want to go to Jesse's youth ministry. We both said, that's a win, because it's a win for the kingdom. It's not about, again, what we can do, but it's about how can we reach our community together, which is really exciting and cool to have people in your community who are like-minded, because sometimes you can find not every church is going to want that.
Correct.
And so that's been cool to see. And then too, even just on a network level, being on a camp team and being able to direct one, that was something when I was a newer youth pastor in our network. And I remember when you and Micah reached out to me about being a part of the camp team, and I got to start with activities, which was awesome.
Let's go.
Stuck with it still though. But that was a huge blessing for me as a new youth pastor out in Port Orchard, small town, didn't know a lot of people. And, people think like Forks is in your area, but that's still like another 3 or 4 hours, right? And so that was a huge thing for me, because those people who I got to serve on that camp team with, obviously I still know you. You've got people like, Darius and Brittany and other youth pastors who were a part of that team who are friends to this day, because we get to do camps and ministry and all these things together. And honestly, like doing your own camp comparatively, I've done it a couple times, compared to working with other churches and pastors that you love, it kind of sucks a little bit, because you miss out on that relationship, you miss out on the pooling of resources and that camaraderie that you get. And those relationships, they last for years. And I'm a firm believer that you can do more together than you can when you're by yourself. And also too, it helps. I'm not the most creative person, just by nature. Someone could think hey, we'll do confetti cannons and pyrotechnics and all that. Like I've never been a part of camp that's had pyro, because fire and students is bad.
Yeah.
But
we've had a couple of really bad smoke bomb incidents.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. It seemed like a good idea until you fill the chapel with smoke.
Yeah. But I need people like that who are going to push me to think, hey, let's dream bigger. And so, there's just so much I think that you lose out on if you're not partnering with other ministries.
So you're saying that when you do an event and you partner with other groups, obviously it expands the opportunity and expands the experience for the students that are coming, right? Because they're using a different lens, and they may even think of a student group that you're not even thinking of, and be better equipped to even reach them, and certainly make an environment that they like more. Yeah. The challenge, right? What's the challenge when you partner with other ministries?
Well, you know how I said it was really good that people bring other ideas?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the challenge is that people bring other ideas.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, you have to figure out, when you're partnering with another event, what works, what's going to be a win for your students, because you can't fully abdicate the fact that you're responsible for your students that you bring. And at the end of the day, you're also responsible to your lead pastor. And so if something goes kind of off the rails and is weird, and you weren't expecting it, like there's always a risk of that. But it helps to know people and to obviously vet out those relationships. So that can be a little bit of a challenge, just culture-wise. Do your camps and your ideas sort of blend and mesh together? We talk about going even across theologies. Well, if you have a church that, let's say, an altar time where they talk about speaking in tongues is a really big deal for them within our, AG fellowship. But then it's a non-denominational church where maybe that's sort of like this topic that they don't really talk about. You could even have some weirdness there. But I think a lot of that you can head off just by having honest dialogue and conversation about it. And that's where, too, you have to be okay with saying, maybe us partnering for this event may not be the best, but you could do something else that fits. Like there's ways to navigate it, I think. But those are some of the challenges I would think.
Yeah. So when you're talking, let's talk about your camp team.
Mm-hmm.
You have a diverse team from all over the state.
Oh, yeah.
And North Idaho.
Yep.
And
North Idaho, the promised land, and the rest of us in Washington.
There you go.
So.
And they bring, all of their ministry contexts to the table.
Yeah.
Certainly makes it more full, but it also creates tensions. How do you navigate those tensions when there's competing different ideas? We've been in the camp meetings together where one group is adamant that the worship set should be, at least an hour. The other one's like, nah, 20 minutes tops. They have more of an outreach culture.
Yeah.
How do you navigate those as a leader? Because again, the value is the partnership. And how do you make it a win for everybody?
Yeah. Well, I think a first step is I try to make sure everyone feels heard at the very least and validated, and that they know that their ministry context that they bring in, does matter and does have value. And so I think when it comes to some of those competing ideas, sort of what you're asking about.
Yeah.
I think again, make sure people feel heard, and then also to be ready to explain like what are some of the values behind why we make certain decisions. Because if you just shut down an idea and say, well, no, like that's a bad idea, we're not doing that. That's not going to have the same response as saying, well, hey, like I totally love and appreciate that's how you guys do things, but here's a value that we can tie this back to for us.
Sure.
Trying to think of even an example from our most recent camp team meeting. And like you said, we were talking through like worship, like, should it be 20 minutes or an hour? Thankfully, no one wanted it to be an hour, especially on that first travel day getting to Silver Lake. You don't want that. I'd be good if worship was 5 minutes sometimes on that first night. But, just talking through like the different, hey, for your students, actually hearing out like, kind of what is the group consensus on far of, how long are worship sets as a whole, that helps. But too, like, the value of worship is a big deal. But anyway, I'm sort of rambling on that point now. But I think you understand, like, just figuring out what's the value we're pointing back to. And for students, I think, saying, hey, like most ministries right about this time is what it is, and kind of going with what serves the whole. Yeah,
I don't think that we can approach ministry partnership without a high value of collaboration. And the cool part is I think the younger generation of leaders are more into collaboration than ever before.
Yeah.
And to which means they're also more willing to compromise and meet other groups where they're at so that the higher value of the collaboration exists.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're the stewards of our youth ministries. And so we have to champion their culture and what's going to speak to them and make this, like, camp's a huge investment financially, huge investment time, takes a lot. And so we want it to be everything that it can be. And so we have to have all those voices at the table to make sure that each of those students is represented. When, talk about when you first started reaching out to people to join teams.
Yeah.
Talk about that process and
sure.
And like, did you hit any roadblocks? What did you learn through that?
Well, I think the first roadblock is getting a youth pastor to return an email. Sometimes can be a challenge.
Welcome to my world.
Yep. I'm sure you don't know anything about that. So that's probably the first one, is sometimes you have to call or send a text message or something like that. That can be a roadblock. But really, I think in my personal experience starting as a director, my biggest roadblock that I faced with reaching out to other youth ministries at first was my own insecurity as a leader. Because it's one thing to talk to a volunteer on your team and say, hey, come help me plan this event. But it's another level to reach out to another ministry leader and say, hey, why don't you come alongside and help us plan and direct this? And so that was just a personal roadblock and insecurity that I faced. And I think that was a challenge at first. And then also too, just getting people together with their schedules, because every church leader is busy and has a different calendar. Some people have youth nights on Thursdays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Sundays. Actually met a guy who wants to think about going to Fridays. And so that is, crazy in my mind.
In Australia, youth night is Friday night.
Wow.
Fun fact.
That is a fun fact for them. I don't think I would want to give up my Friday. But so those were some of the initial hurdles.
So the premise of that question is, man, it can feel personal when sometimes you hit roadblocks when you're trying to partnership. But I think you adequately talked about how, just returning emails, the cultures, everybody's busy. I don't know any board youth pastors. Do you?
No, I don't.
No. And so trying to get people to partner, and then how many youth pastors are, marketplace, right? They're bivocational, and man, so anytime you get a call from them is precious time, because they're managing, whether it's a full-time job and youth or part, whatever it is. It's a lot, and so you throw family obligations on top of that, and it's a challenge, no question. When you're talking, do you look for certain things, or are you a doors open guy? You're just looking for people that are willing to partner with you?
It's a balance I've had to find, because there are certain roles that you need like people in, like, say activities. That's a very specific type of person who's going to run that and do that well. But for the most part, I think it's doors open. And I think sometimes when we think through a camp team, we think, oh, everyone has to be on the same like leadership tier almost, because you have sort of like your camp directors who run activities, all those things. And you could think, well, I filled all these roles. Now what do I do? Well, the great thing is you can always partner people with each other. And so for our camp, we always try to have 2 pastors running each area if we can, if there's that many people trying to be a part of things. So Silver Lake Live, we've got 2 different ministries running that. Activities is 2 different churches. We have a value on not doing a specific area within that alone. And so we try to make sure that it's an open door, but there's also some strategic ways that we actually partner them up with other people leading areas, which works pretty well.
There's nothing worse than being invited to something and then not having a seat at the table. And so I love the way that you've created that space to make sure that every voice is valued and has a place to jump in. Certainly in Northwest Youth, we want everything to be open door. If you're willing to lend your voice to the conversation, you're welcome. And in that, we have pretty strict adherence to the idea that if you're there, you're important.
For sure. And I think real quick too on that, you even instilled this in me early on as a director, that it's not just my camp, but that it's our camp.
It is our camp.
And so every invite, email, or communication always says, hey, I believe that this is our camp, not just my camp, and your voice matters. And so I think that's a value that, you've even created for us top down, which I think is good. And so thank you for also leading us that way.
It wasn't me. It was the culture I stepped into, and because it was meaningful. My very first summer camp as a young youth pastor I stepped into, that was the heart behind the director when they reached out to me. And man, it was huge for me. It's when you send that first email and you don't know anybody, they're like, there's a tremendous amount. So when you get ghosted, there's a ton of rejection that can be felt there. So, man, well, love this conversation. We do want Northwest Youth to be a place where we collaborate and partner. It's not that we're better together. We really thrive when we're together, and whether that's in your community, or as a network wide when we partner for events, I think that it works both ways. So, man, thanks Jesse for this. And if there's a youth pastor that's wanting to get involved, get plugged in, or just wants to pick your brain, are you willing to have that conversation with them offline? They can contact you through social
100%.
media or whatever. I appreciate that. Great. Well, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Of course. Happy to be here.